It is 7:27. So we're going to take a few minutes yet before we get started tonight. Um, I am using my headset tonight to hopefully make uh, my sound better, but more importantly, you won't hear the sounds going on in my kitchen, such as the dishwasher, which is running. I know it looks strange with the headset on. C'est la vie. That's just how it will be tonight. So anyway, the closed captioning is hysterical. I said, c'est la vie. Nope, still didn't get it right. Anyway, apparently it doesn't understand French. I don't understand French either, but I do know a few French phrases. Hope that everyone's week is going well. Still weekend for many folks who had today off. I was able to sleep in this morning myself, which I immensely enjoyed. I did wake up at 8:30, took care of some business, started playing one of my computer games, and fell back to sleep in the chair with my eyeglasses on my head, which is kind of funny. And I slept for at least 2 hours, maybe closer to 3. Looks like we have one person watching with us. Hello, welcome. Please feel free to say hello in the chat. And please feel free to ask questions as we go through our study this evening. We have another less than a minute now before 7:30, and we will get started at 7:30. Oh, there we go. My phone now says 7:30. So welcome again this evening to our book study of Sin of Certainty. This is subtitle to this is Why God Desires Our Trust More Than Our Correct Beliefs. It is written by Peter Enns, copyright 2016 by HarperCollins Publishers. A little note about Peter Enns. Peter Enns grew up in the evangelical community, was educated in the evangelical community, got his doctorate in biblical studies. And the more he read Bible, the more he read scripture, the more he recognized that he couldn't continue to profess the things that he had professed in the past. It did result in him being asked to leave the college where he was teaching. It was a traumatic experience for him. I love his writings. They are down to earth, easy to read, and talk about the Bible in a way that I was taught the Bible in college and in seminary, and the way that I want the people in our parishes, in our congregations, learning about Scripture. So I share that with you now. So today we're at chapter 4, and this chapter is called 2 Miserable People Worth Listening To. And there's only 2 subchapters in this one, Trust God Anyway, and Don't Even Try to Understand What God is up to. So without further ado, we will continue with chapter 4. So Trust God Anyway is basically looking at the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, we're all familiar with Ecclesiastes, and especially, I think, chapter 3, which the Byrds turned into a wonderful song back in the 60s. For every season, turn, turn, turn. I don't dare sing it. I'll get dinged by YouTube for a copyright violation. So, but this is looking at the whole of the book. So starting with chapter 1. And the version I'm reading out of today is the contemporary English version. That is the version that is translated by the American Bible Society. With all my wisdom, I tried to understand everything that happens here on earth. And God has made this so hard for us humans to do. I have seen it all. And everything is as senseless as chasing the wind. If something is crooked, it can't be made straight. And if something isn't there, it can't be counted. Now, Peter Enns also says to look at verse 7, chapter 7, verse 13 as well. Think of what God has done. If God makes something crooked, can you make it straight? Now, the author, who's known as, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, Colette, has some issues with God. You know, day-to-day deeds get us nowhere. We can't change anything. Colette is in a faith crisis mode and asking, what is the point of life? I think we've all been there. And the author even points out that nature around us is made to run in meaningless circles, that the sun rises and sets, rises and sets, rises and sets, and nothing changes. Even if we were to gain the world, if we had all the wealth and all the world and all the power, when we die, we can't take it with us. So what is the point of accumulating wealth and power and prestige? And what happens when we die? People won't remember us. Kind of a very dark point of view. Ecclesiastes 1, verses 8 to 11. All of life is far more boring than words could ever say. Our eyes and our ears are never satisfied with what we see and hear. Everything that happens has happened before. There is nothing new under the sun. Someone might say, hey, here's something new. But it happened before, long before we were born. No one who lived in the past is remembered anymore. And everyone yet to be born, they will be forgotten too. And the teacher doesn't quite trust the idea of heaven. Again, Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 19 to 21. Like animals, we breathe and die. And we are no better off than they are. It just doesn't make sense. All living creatures go to the same place. We are made from earth, and we return to earth. Who really knows if our spirits go up and the spirits of animals go down into the earth? You can't tell this person that the Bible is all happy-go-lucky positive, because Ecclesiastes, this teacher, is quite honest with us about his opinion of the world. And yet, despite the despair of this book, we see a person who still believes, even if they don't have all the answers. Now, there's a second voice in the book of Ecclesiastes, the narrator who introduces us to the Colette at the beginning of the book. And he picks up in chapter 12. I was a wise teacher with much understanding, and I collected a number of proverbs that I had carefully studied. Then I tried to explain these things in the best and most accurate way. Words of wisdom are like the stick a farmer uses to make the animals move. These sayings come from God, our only shepherd, and they are like nails that fasten things together. My child, I warn you to stay away from any teachings except these. There is no end to books, and too much study will wear you out. Everything you were taught can be put into a few words. Respect and obey God. This is what life is all about. God will judge everything we do, even what is done in secret, whether good or bad. You know, we may not like the first speaker, the poet, who has a lot to say. And he seems full of despair and frustration, wondering what the point of life is. But his words are wise. His words are the words of wisdom that the narrator speaks, the stick that the farmer uses to make the animals move. They're good for us to pay attention to. But at the same time, the narrator reminds us that if we spend too much time obsessing over the meaning of life or trying to understand God, it's only going to make us crazy. There is no end to books, and too much study will wear you out. There are some things we cannot know. And the more we try to know them, the more frustrated we become. In the face of a world that is unknown, we can do only one thing: respect and obey God. That is what life is all about. We are asked to trust God even when nothing makes sense, even when everything feels meaningless. Now, Ecclesiastes is an honest reflection of a faith experience. Ecclesiastes doesn't tell us we have to know what we believe, but rather reminds us to trust in God even when we don't know what to believe, even when nothing makes sense whatsoever. Now, the second part of chapter 4 is looking at the book of Job. The subtitle for this section is "Don't Even Try to Understand What God is Up to." Now, you may remember from the book of Job that Job had a great life until he didn't. One day he is the richest man around with a large family, and the next he has nothing and his children are gone. Now, the book of Job begins with God bragging about Job to the accuser, a great name for Satan. And God says, "Look at my man Job. He is the most faithful man ever." And the accuser says, "That's because you've given him everything. Of course he loves you. Take away everything and he'll drop you like a hot potato." And God's response is, "Okay, I'll take that bet." And with that, Job's livestock are stolen or killed. His children die in a freak accident. And then God gives the accuser permission to make Job kill. But Job doesn't lose faith. He gets angry. He gets frustrated. He asks a lot of questions. But he never gives up on God or on his faith. Job tells his friends, "I'm innocent," even when they don't believe him. That's actually, the friends are like, "Come on, Job, tell us what you did. Tell us what you did." Almost like they're salivating on waiting to hear the sordid details of his sinfulness. And his friends simply can't believe that God would allow all of this to happen to a righteous man. And Job says to God, "What have I done to deserve this?" And the book goes on for ages, like 34 chapters between his friends accusing him and him denying any wrongdoing and demanding that God respond to him. And the friends quote this kind of mainstream biblical idea that actions have consequences. And We see this for an example, in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 33 to 35. He places a curse on the home of everyone who is evil, but blesses the home of every good person. The Lord sneers at those who sneer at him, but is kind to everyone who is humble. You'll be praised if you are wise, but you will be disgraced if you are a stubborn fool. We hear this idea in many places, right? That bad things only happen to bad people. We hear the opposite. If you remember from last week's chapter, we hear where the psalmist is angry because the good people are thriving or the bad people are thriving and the righteous people are suffering. So again, we see this idea that when bad things happen, people will come out and say, oh, it's their fault, God did this to them. And we see this, Pat Robertson has done this numerous times. This is from a feature on Time Magazine's website that was dated September 16th, 2011. So that web article talks about different ways in which Pat Robertson has made some gaffes, and this is one of them. On the 700 Club in 2005, Robertson blamed Hurricane Katrina on the issue of abortion in John Roberts' Supreme Court nomination. You may remember that John Roberts was a Republican nomination. Anyway, just that Hurricane Katrina was God's response to the issue of abortion and the John Roberts Supreme Court nomination. Another time that he did this was in the 2011 Haitian earthquake, devastating earthquake. In a January 13th appearance in the 700 Club, Robertson used a shaky bit of history to imply that the earthquake was divine retribution for Haitian voodoo doctors enlisting the help of Satan to free their country from the French some 200 years ago. We still try to explain bad things away by blaming people. We still say they must have done something wrong, that God caused this to happen. And the Jewish people, they tried to explain away why God had allowed them to be captured by the Babylonians and sent into exile. And they believed it was due to their disobedience. And they looked to Deuteronomy chapter 28, which spells out that basically if you do good, you will prosper. And if you disobey, your life will get miserable. Now, this is not in the book, but I just want to counter that when Jesus is asked in two separate occasions why something bad happened. Jesus doesn't answer the question. The disciples asked Jesus why this man was born blind in John's gospel. And, was it because his parents sinned or was it because he sinned? And Jesus says, it was for me to show you the glory of God. Jesus doesn't answer the question. And another time, some people come and talk to Jesus about some people who died that Pilate killed in Galilee and commingled their sacrifices. And Jesus says, it's not because they were sinners. And he says, and the same thing with the Tower of Siloam, when the Tower of Siloam fell. Do you really believe that the people killed when that tower fell were the worst sinners in all of Jerusalem? So again, we have the two sides of the same argument happening in Scripture. And so I'm going to continue back with Job. So Job's friends are saying, oh, you must have done something wrong. And in the mindset in their mindset, that makes sense. That's what they have taught. That's what we hear in Proverbs. That's what we hear in Deuteronomy. Something, you must have done something bad, or these bad things would not be happening to you. And Job is saying, I did nothing wrong. And hey, God, if I did do something wrong, would you please tell me what I did? And nobody can explain why these terrible things are happening. And the Bible gives us the book of Job and the book of Ecclesiastes as a reminder that even when we think we know what God is doing, we probably don't. As the readers of Job, we understand that this was happening because of a bet between God and Satan. But Job doesn't understand that. His friends don't understand that. And I really, as Lutherans, we don't read the Bible as history. Like, this is something that actually happened. This is a story meant to explain something. I don't believe God would ever make a bet that would lead to somebody experiencing hardship, like Job experienced hardship. I need to say that because if God is that callous with our lives, I don't know that I could trust God. But this story is given to us, again, to answer the question, why do bad things happen? And there's no answer given. We cannot understand what God is doing. Sometimes the Bible presents God's ways as black and white, and sometimes it just isn't clear. One of the things I love about Lutheranism is that I always see Lutherans as trying to live in the gray. You know, a lot of times we as Christians can try to understand the world as black and white, right and wrong, this way or that way. But I think as Lutherans, at least in our theology, we understand that life is not black and white, that a lot of times it's gray. And we just do the best we can. And God's grace gives us the ability to live in that grayness. At one time, there's this famous quote that people always take out of context for Luther, says, sin boldly, right? And that's more along the lines of when you don't know what to do, just pick a direction, do something, and trust in the grace of God, even more boldly. Because sometimes you don't know the right way to go. Sometimes you don't know the right thing to do. So you do the best you can. You make the best decisions you can in the moment. And if you make a mistake, you trust in the grace of God even more boldly. God is above us. And God will always be shrouded in mystery. God will always be inaccessible to our human minds. And that is why God is God. When God finally does answer Job, God doesn't explain himself. Instead, God reminds Job that God is the creator and Job is the creation. Job never gets a proper answer to the question of why all these bad things happen to him. And then God turns to his friends. You were wrong to accuse Job of every sin under the sun. That should be S-U-N, not S-O-N. Job was blameless, and you assumed that he was guilty. What terrible friends you are. This is a little vindication for Job, I think. As children of God, we have to understand that we can't understand. And we need to let go of our need for certainty. Again, because we are the creation. We're not the creator. And I always come back to that quote in 1 Corinthians 13. If 1 Corinthians 13 is that chapter on love is patient, love is kind, blah, 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 blah. But what it also says, the context is you have these churches arguing over who's the better Christian. And some people are saying, well, we're better Christians because we speak in tongues. And Paul comes back and says, you know what? It's not about that. It's about love. It's about loving your neighbor. It's about, recognizing that we each have different gifts, and the gifts are important. But if you don't love the people around you, then it's not important, right? Love is patient, love is kind, so on. But then just towards the end of that, he says, we see through a mirror dimly lit. We see only in part, and one day we will see in full. Again, these people are walking around thinking they and only they have the full understanding of God because they're speaking in tongues and they're doing all this other stuff. And Paul's like, no. We only see a little bit. We can only see a little bit of what God is doing. Someday, when we go to heaven, when we are reunited with God, then we will understand more fully. But right now, we only understand in part. Because we are the creation, not the creator. Basically, as Christians, we're called to trust in God even when things don't make sense. We live in a world right now that doesn't make a lot of sense, don't we? The pandemic, the economy. A year ago, it was trying to find toilet paper and sanitizer and Lysol. Today, lumber, furniture. We're still waiting. Neil and I are still waiting for furniture to arrive that was ordered in May. It was supposed to be delivered this week, and we had a call. It's not coming. The supply chain is all messed up. You go drive by the car lots in town, and there's hardly any cars there because there's a lag in the supply chain, which has been caused by the pandemic. Things don't make sense, doesn't make sense when a young person, a seemingly healthy young person, dies suddenly from this coronavirus, and someone else who you wouldn't think would survive does survive. There's so many things in this world that don't make sense. And we will make ourselves crazy if we try to understand it. If we try to understand the way the world works and the way God works. As Christians, we need to let go of our need for understanding. And that can be very hard to do. And that's basically the 4th chapter. I do hope that if you're watching this, that later, if you have questions, please reach out to me. I love to talk scripture. I love to talk Bible. I will totally geek out on you with this topic. I'll have a blast doing it. I hope you will. And I know that sometimes this stuff can be a little tough. That maybe I'm challenging some of your assumptions about the Bible and about Christianity. Please reach out and talk to me. It's not always easy. And thank you for watching. And it says next week, chapter 4. Actually, it would be next week, it would be chapter 5. And again, 7:30 Monday night, available on YouTube and Facebook on our Facebook page later. So we're ending early tonight. I guess not too early. It's only 7:57. Thank you, and have a blessed week. And I hope you all had a wonderful 4th of July weekend. God bless.